Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel, Queen Bee SP, with another chapter of Scientology Abuse at the Top. Thank you for tuning in, and here we go. Our next chapter is called Up and Down the Totem Pole, Chapter 9. Okay, you ready for a roller coaster ride? If I thought the last chapter gave me a headache, oh, just wait till you see this one. All right, so here we go. Chapter 9, Up and Down the Totem Pole. In 1996, I was called to a meeting in the WDC conference room with David Miscavige regarding Scientology expansion plans. He said I was needed back in the Watchdog Committee to oversee approximately 170 church organizations internationally. So if you remember, I think at the end of the last chapter, I was removed from post again. Let me just see. What was it? Oh, so many up and downs. Let's see. That's right. So at the end of the last chapter, my husband was sent to the Rehabilitation Project Force, um, and I was put under guard at the swamp for 2 months under watch, eating with the rats because I didn't do anything about my husband anyway. So here we go again. Now he wants me back in the Watchdog Committee. Miscavige pointed out that it had been 10 years since L. Ron Hubbard passed away. He told me he knew how and when LRH would return and that it would be soon. I remember that conversation. Could this be for real? As a Scientologist, that's what you hope for. That's what you are striving for, that, that if you die, you're coming back and you have full cause over when and where. And, and of course, we're building L. Ron Hubbard's facilities in the hopes of him coming back. Roanne is his granddaughter, who is in charge of the household unit of taking his clothes and laying them out for him every day. I mean, were we brainwashed or what? Anyway, so Miscavige was like serious, and he's telling me LRH is coming back soon. He said it was urgent to get these organizations under competent management and expanding at once. I responded with a yes, sir, and immediately routed on to post. My first assignment was to evaluate what was wrong with Tokyo.org. An evaluation is conducted by a manager per specific church management policies, where one isolates the applicable references, lays out the statistics, what the situation is, the most major departure from the perceived ideal scene for that activity, all of the data on the matter, the why, and the bright ideas, plans, and program to handle what was found. Miscavige gave me 24 hours to come up with the right why for their failure to expand. It was Christmas. I looked into the data files, and nearly every document was in Japanese. Most of the management personnel between myself and the organization were taking time off and were not available to answer any questions. How do you like that for your first assignment? There's a core of evaluators in the executive strata, and it's their job to do this, yet Miscavige ordered me to do it directly on a bypass. Needless to say, I used every minute of those 24 hours to get the evaluation done. Despite the language barrier, I was able to see that this organization was located in 13 separate buildings. The general staff were completely untrained due to lack of Scientology materials translated into Japanese, and they had no set schedules, so teamwork was out the window. The handling included relocating them in a centralized building with proper flow lines and routing forms, forming up a translations unit for staff training packs, and putting them on standard schedule that allowed for on-the-job training. This simple handling, once implemented, greatly expanded the Tokyo organization. Within a few weeks, Miscavige called another meeting to cover new expansion plans. This time, he said he needed a WDC member for the ABLE sector. ABLE. ABLE stands for Association for Better Living and Education. ABLE is an umbrella organization which specializes in promoting the use of Scientology technology as a means to solve social problems, drugs, crime, illiteracy, and immorality through Narconon, Criminon, Applied Scholastics, and the Way to Happiness. Miscavige explained that the ABLE sector needed to become bigger than all of Scientology combined to address society's social ills, illiteracy, crime, drugs, and immorality. That afternoon, I was transferred to the post of WDC ABLE. My first instructions were to study up on all of the secular organizations that ABLE was responsible for. This included Applied Scholastics, which promotes the use of Hubbard's educational techniques, originally developed to help Scientologists study course materials. Narconon, a drug education and rehabilitation program founded on Hubbard's belief that drugs and poisons stored in the body impede awareness and spiritual growth. Criminon, a program designed to rehabilitate criminal offenders by teaching them study and communication methods and helping them reform their lives. And the Way to Happiness Foundation, which disseminates a moral code booklet written by L. Ron Hubbard entitled The Way to Happiness. So much I could say about all of that, but anyway. This entire sector lacked proper structure and codification, which I was to remedy. During this time period, Miscavige was running a campaign to get staff members to take their hats, job functions is what a hat means, back from him. He had routine base briefings with overhead diagrams showing how every submission for every function at the base was having to come to him for approval. This was despite the fact that he was the one ordering it to be done that way. He had baseball caps made with the post title of everyone on the property that he thought was not doing his job, but dumping it on him, and had these hats put up on a huge lit display in the dining hall. There must have been 200 hats up there. In order to get the hat taken down from display, you had to show Miscavige that you were properly performing the duties of your job and submit evidence to him for approval. One of those hats was WDC ABLE. Needless to say, most hats remained on display for some time. There were penalties that went along with not getting your hat back. As Miscavige felt he wasn't getting adequate response from people, he created name tags to place on their chests. The first was a fluorescent pink tag that said, "Wee," to signify that the person wearing the tag was irresponsible. He was passing these out like candy for people to wear, replacing the usual post title tag that was part of the uniform. Miscavige asked me what I thought of the derogatory tag that he had just placed on another staff member. I said, "You can't get much brighter than that." He said, "Oh yeah, watch me." And he walked off with his entourage. Within an hour, Miscavige returned with an array of about 10 different tags with various disparaging statements on them, all in the brightest colors one could imagine. And I got the full array to wear personally. I mean, how to degrade somebody. Fluorescent green, lime yellow, like all these different colors, all fluorescent, and they said different things like backflasher, dilettante, overt product maker, glib, no best, dev tea merchant. I had to tape these tags all together, stick them on my shirt, and wear them around the base like campaign bars draping down my entire chest. I couldn't take them off until approved by him. I wrote petitions to get them removed, which weren't approved. I didn't wear them one day, and I was instructed to immediately put them back on. Many other staff were also running around with these tags for one reason or another. Some had more tags than others, depending on how he was feeling at the time he issued them. At every weekly staff meeting, we were required to get up and announce our flaps to the rest of the crew. These announcements needed to include the fact that we still had our hats up on display as Miscavige was still performing our duties on a bypass. Eventually, the hats were taken down to make way for another display. This time, it was showing all of the renovations projects that Miscavige was having to personally oversee. It was meant to rub our noses in the fact that he had to do everything himself, all the way down to space planning our own birthing buildings. In 1997, the entirety of CMO International and the executive strata moved into a modular trailer as a temporary office setup so their existing building could be renovated for something else. The trailer was only meant to be occupied for a year at the most, while permanent office spaces were constructed. However, that was never done. I'll show you a picture of what these look like because it later became the whole. Meantime, Miscavige occupied a building that he had built to his elaborate standards for upwards of $70 million. This huge building was only occupied by himself and a handful of his personal staff. I'll show you a picture of that too. After holding WDC Able for 1 year, I was removed over the subject of their corporate mess. Legally, the Able sector was not supposed to be sending money into the Sea Org reserves accounts, but it was. There were extensive meetings held regarding this with church tax attorneys, Monique Yingling and Tim Bowles, who were attempting to get it straightened out. I sat in those 8-hour meetings with these guys, and it was not fun. And, they gave proposals of what to do. So you'll see what happens. I had made a proposal on how to organize the sector based on the attorney's advice, which would have meant that the funds that had been going to in reserves would get rerouted to the social betterment programs themselves instead. This didn't fly with Miscavige, who said that it's up to legal to find a way to get things set up the way we, church management, want it, not the other way around. My proposal was therefore rejected, and I was removed from post, restricted to the property, and once again assigned to birthing out by the swamp. This time, I was informed that I was being permanently kicked out of the Commodore's Messenger org. I had no prior ethics gradients applied, no justice action was taken. I was to report to Golden Arrow Productions for assignment. This order was issued by Mark Ingber, who had just that day assumed post as COCMO Int WDC chairman. I could have protested the order, but I didn't want a thing to do with Mark being my senior. And I was looking forward to a definite change of scenery. After a few weeks of full-time renovations work, I was assigned to the post of circuit board in charge on the e-meter assembly line in Gold. The e-meter, or electropsychometer, is a device invented in the 1940s used to measure the mental state or change of state of a person in an auditing session to help the auditor locate areas of distress so these can be addressed and handled. That's a Scientology definition. My definition of the e-meter is a crude form of lie detector that is abused, and it doesn't register anything, and it's used for interrogations, and it's used to mess with people's minds. Suddenly, I found myself soldering resistors, transistors, and diodes all day long. Electronics was a whole new field for me, but I picked it up fast, and I quite enjoyed the transformation from the continuous stress in management. I held this position for about 8 months. It's really funny. They assigned me an assistant on this job, which his name was Josh Gilbert. And so he was the circuit board assembly IC assistant. And as a team, we got all the e-meters done. Anyway, it was a total breath of fresh air doing this. In Gold, for some reason, on a production line, it was okay to listen to music. So I played a lot of Matchbox 20, which I really liked at that time. All right. During this time, I was informed that my father had a heart attack and was going in for quadruple bypass surgery. I hadn't seen my dad in many, many years and felt an urgent need to be there, even if only for a few days. My request was denied because Miscavige said I did nothing for the able sector to make up the damage I had caused. I'm doing circuit boards, dude. What do you expect me to do for the able sector down in LA? It's ridiculous. I have no idea what he expected me to do with able while I was the circuit board in charge in gold. I tried to reason with the ethics officer, requesting that I be granted a few days to tend to this family emergency. Finally, he said, meaning the ethics officer, that if I were to go, I would have to bring along a security guard who would be with me the entire time. I was already going to have to borrow money from someone for my own flight to Seattle. To pay for a second person's flight would mean I'd be in debt for a very long time. Plus, I had no idea how I could explain bringing, quote unquote, a friend with me from California to visit my dad in the hospital, having them, a complete stranger, stay at my family's house while I was there. So I didn't go. Yeah, I mean, come on. How do I explain I've got a bodyguard with me? Even if I made up some story, yeah, this is a friend and they're, I don't know. Anyway, they're so freaking weird. And I just didn't want to put my dad through that. So I didn't go. Fortunately, my dad came through his operation successfully, as otherwise I don't know what I would have done, as it would have ripped my heart out. At this point, I really started thinking hard about whether or not I wanted to remain in the Sea Org at all. One stormy day, there was a power outage on the base. It happened often. So specific people were assigned to immediately report to the generator building when the sirens went off. They would then shut down direct power lines to each building on the property and switch over to generator power. It was a timed drill. So I was on that team, obviously. While standing at the generator in the pouring rain, Miscavige drove by, saw me, and stopped. He signaled for me to come over. I said, "Yes, sir." He asked, "So, what are you going to do now?" Now, I'm not sure what got into me, but I said, "Move back up to an executive position quickly." He gave me a thumbs up and drove off. Oh my God. That afternoon, I was ordered to turn over my functions in gold and report back to the CMO. I first did some training under Shelley Miscavige in CMO Gold. CMO Gold is a small unit over Golden Era Productions who used to get LRH's orders complied to within Gold. When LRH passed away, they executed the orders of WDC Gold. But as Miscavige spent a huge percentage of his time in Gold bypassing, CMO Gold were his execution arm to enforce his orders in the main. I was learning the ropes on what it takes to shoot movies, as several of COB's outstanding orders were in the cinematography area. During this time, Isaac Hayes was on the set every day shooting a sequence to a Scientology technical training film. Isaac was shot standing aboard a floating platform in space with a powerful telescope capable of viewing any civilization in the universe. In this film, Isaac narrates Hubbard's scripted lessons to auditor trainees, one of which was that someday they'll find themselves on other planets as the sole person to disseminate Hubbard's technology. So they had better remember their lessons well. Toward the beginning, Isaac says, "Earth is not necessarily the most inhabited planet in the universe." However, he would alter the line to say, "Earth is not necessarily the most inhibited planet in the universe," to which the director kept yelling, "Cut." I believe that was Mitch. I'd like to ask him that question if that was him there. I forget. But we were all standing there and we would get a big kick out of that. We all got a fun laugh out of that. While this film was being shot, I received an order on the set to immediately report back to CMO. Here we go again. This is where the roller coaster continues to go up and down. Shelley Miscavige wanted me to resume post as WDC able. However, I told her I did not want to work under Mark Ingber, but would rather stay in CMO Gold where I felt I could be more productive. She called me back later that afternoon and said I was to report directly to Mark Ingber. As COC went WC chairman for posting. I cringed and thought, this is going to be hell. And boy, was I right. Oh my God. 1 second. Ugh, here we go again. This is nasty. Ingber put me on post in WDC over 3 sectors: the Sea Org service orgs and Scientology churches and celebrity centers, WDC, SO, SEN, CC. The watchdog committee had disintegrated so badly in the time I was gone that I had to take on multiple sectors, and there were still several sectors left uncovered. Yeah, it all disintegrated under Mark Ingber, and now I'm going to be thrown into the lion's den again. I was given a binder of orders from Miscavige so I could catch up on what had been happening in CMOint while I was gone. In that binder was a bunch of noise and ethics drama that I was so happy to have missed. It also included a document entitled The Jelly Project. Jelly was Miscavige's dog. This document, this document, yeah, that's what it was. Okay. This document was an ethics project for the INT crew. Put everyone through low conditions, weed out the suppressives, and so on. It was named after his dog, as Miscavige said, the INT crew were so unproductive and degraded that even his dog could do a better job. A few days later, Miscavige came into WDC with Jelly, dressed in a black sweater with 4 gold captain stripes on her epaulets. The dog let out a little whimper of a bark when she saw me, and Miscavige said that she can sniff out crimes, so I must have something slimy going on. I had to do everything in my power not to laugh, because he was actually serious. I figured what Jelly was really trying to say was, you look like one of the only sane people around here. Now, can you please help me get out of this ridiculous outfit? Some of the staff I previously worked with were actually required to salute this dog or face the wrath of Miscavige. Within a few days of my return to INT, Miscavige gave me an order to evaluate the entirety of the Western United States, covering every sector, including Scientology missions and ABLE, as well as all Sea Org and Scientology organizations in this zone. He gave me 24 hours to get it done. This is an evaluation that spanned every sector, which should have been more correctly directed to WDC chairman. But within 15 minutes of receiving that order, I had a slew of RTC enforcers at my desk to ensure I did nothing but the ordered evaluation within the allotted time. Okay, just imagine that. These people are like these little attack dogs that when their master gives them an instruction, they're all over it like little demons. And you know, so they got this assignment and they take their assignment very seriously. So there's like a bunch of different people standing over me and following me every single step of the way, asking me questions about what I'm doing all the time. We called it getting ghosted. And what that meant was someone that literally was next to you every second of the day. I know that that's a different real world definition. Ghosting, I think it means you disappear, but they didn't disappear. They clung on more like Velcro. These people ghosted me everywhere I went, walked with me to the bathroom, listened in on any phone call, watched over what I was typing, took notes of anything I did and said. Needless to say, I found it to be a tad difficult to concentrate, and I said as much. This landed me in a confessional room with an RTC staff member asking me for my crimes. A few precious hours went by where I should have been doing the evaluation. I was trying to figure out anything to say so I could get out of that room and back to the task at hand. There was always so much pressure. Oh, just intense pressure. Anyway, and so I'm in getting this stupid confessional. And by the way, like, from my last confessional, nothing happened. I mean, all I did was work. You watched me every second of the day. Come on. I knew that if I didn't have something submitted within the allotted time to Miscavige, I'd be in more trouble than I already was with his minions. Because of the time crunch, Ingber was ordered to help me get the evaluation done, which we finally did complete. Ingber told me, now you're going to do the same thing for every other continent. Oh, goody. Within a week of arriving back to Samoant, the whole organization was assigned a condition of confusion by Miscavige, which is the lowest condition that exists in Scientology's ethics codes. I was unclear as to why the condition was assigned. Samoant had already been in the low condition of liability for a few years by that point, complete with all penalties, 20-minute meal breaks, pay cuts, no liberties or social activities, etc. Along with the confusion assignment came a list of things that had to be done before the condition would be upgraded. This isn't how the condition formulas are meant to work. The LRH formula for confusion is simply find out where you are. But Miscavige was making it into something else entirely. A list of 2 gruesomes was also issued. These were penalties levied for any noncompliance, based on a policy letter written by L. Ron Hubbard, which states, make the penalty for noncompliance too gruesome to be faced and enforce it. Boy, was this policy ever abused. Shouldn't have been written in the first place, but then after it was written and, became a Bible for sadistic people, it was super abused. Items on the too gruesome list included such things as being thrown in the lake. Now, just so you know, it's not a nice lake. It's a leechy, yucky lake, swampy lake. And not for swimming in or anything like that. And you would get thrown in there just in your uniform. It wasn't like, okay, let's get on our bathing suits and go to the lake. No, it's like in your uniform, you're taken down there and you're chucked in this terrible thing. All-night amends projects and being placed under pay hold. Those inflicting the penalties would get very creative on what to assign as amends projects. I've seen people assigned to scrubbing dumpsters, cleaning toilets, or doing the shredding for the whole organization through the night. Yeah, I mean, cleaning toilets is no big deal, but you're meant to do it with a toothbrush and, every single thing had to be spotless and it had to be inspected. And you're just sitting there with one toilet bowl for hours. Per another LRH reference, the Nothing to Do with Me Club was implemented. I was assigned to this club, of course, for slows on getting a new team of executives trained and sent out to one of the churches. There are certain steps one takes to graduate from this club, including writing a 100-word essay about how nothing on your job has anything to do with you. I think it was 300 words, actually. I don't know, because it took a long time. One has to do extensive amends and basically prove that you're now with the program and willing to be completely responsible for your duties. I got the command team onto post and obtained approval from WC chairman to graduate from that club. In meetings with Miscavige, he often accused us of being pie face, having blank expressions. We got that way because if we smiled, we were asked why the hell we were smiling. If we looked confused about what he was saying, he'd make everyone in the room look at your face. He'd point at random people and say, see how this punk is looking at me? Miscavige put up a big poster of a blank face in the WDC conference room with a handwritten note under the cartoon saying, is it done yet? No, sir. He wanted us constantly reminded that we looked pathetic and were in non-compliance with anything he wanted done. Greg Wilhare, a deputy to Miscavige, called a meeting of all WDC and several other executives of CMOINT and the executive strata. He briefed us that we were all to stay in the conference room until we worked through lower conditions as the executives responsible for the management of Scientology internationally. We ended up staying in this conference room for nearly a week straight. with short bathroom and meal breaks during the day, and some time to sleep and shower. During this time, we told each other what transgressions we ever committed against the organization, and in some cases, what destructive intentions or evil purposes we were operating on when we committed that transgression. This was a fest. It was just a nightmare. It was torture to sit through this. Wilhare recorded these meetings and submitted them to Miscavige, who was directing him from Clearwater, Florida at the time. Yeah, he'd send them daily, and sometimes by the minute, Miscavige was listening in. Miscavige managed CMO-INT on a daily report line. No matter where he was, he'd be in our hair, micromanaging us with streams of orders that were strewn with harsh criticisms and scoldings, to say it mildly. In one of these daily report replies, Miscavige ordered us to immediately fill the post of WDC Gold, which was unoccupied at the time. No one was to go home until we came up with a solution. Anyone who had held the post of WDC Gold in the past did not last very long. There was a lot of intense pressure and a large amount of technical knowledge required to supervise the production of Scientology training films and audio-visual products. What made the WC Gold position most untenable, however, was the fact that Miscavige loved to bypass and hobby horse in gold, and he would blow up about any deviation he could detect on his routine inspections there. Our list of prospects for the job was blank. Anyone we named was immediately crossed off as they were too weak, not experienced enough, a previous failure, etc. A few people were asked if they'd accept the position, to which they refused based on the fate of those who held the post before. They thought it was much safer to keep one's head down and remain in a lower condition in the organization than to attempt this bucking bronco. I was holding 3 sectors at that time, so these post refusals were getting to me. I didn't want to spend one more minute listening to people turn down responsibility or whine about their fear of getting into trouble if they failed. Yeah, we're Sea Org members, and the motto is supposed to be make it go right and persist until you do. And, what happened to that, guys? We're trying to fill this position and now you're whining. Anyway, and then fear of getting into trouble. Man, I think by that time I'd been on the RPF 1,000 times, up and down and always in trouble and busted to the swamp and whatever, and here's somebody like not wanting to get their hands dirty. Anyway, so I proclaimed, I'll do the post. The room went silent. Then after that concept started to sink in, a lot of concern was expressed since I knew very little about the various divisions of gold, having mainly been posted in CMO-INT for the previous 2 decades. At least I had worked in the manufacturing division on the e-meter assembly line for several months and spent some time apprenticing in the cinematography division with the shoot crew. I told them that I had been in WDC for many years over several sectors with decent statistics. I said I knew the basics of the tools of management, evaluation, orders and compliance, stat analysis, investigations, etc., which would be the tools I should be using for any sector, including gold. While Miscavige often sat down at the editing bay, dictating how some video should be spliced together, that wasn't the actual function of a WDC member. Everyone in the meeting agreed that they could more easily replace me on the other sectors I was holding than find another WDC Gold. Therefore, the personnel department proposed my name to Miscavige for the post. Miscavige wasn't on the property at the time. This was November 2000. So while we waited for word back, I was instructed to study the numerous volumes of LRH references and dispatches concerning gold, which I did amongst my other duties. In the middle of this, I received word that my Aunt Colleen was getting married and she wanted me to attend. She even asked that I perform the ceremony as I was an ordained minister of the church. I told her I'd make arrangements to fly up to Seattle for the wedding, then immediately return since I was quite busy. I wrote a formal request to my superior to attend this wedding. It was rejected based on the concern that Miscavige was expected back and I needed to finish my gold reference study beforehand in case he wanted to interview me for the position. I called my aunt and told her I was unable to leave even for a day. It's pathetic. Miscavige did arrive back within a few days and called a meeting of all WDC. He said to me, "I understand you volunteered for the post of WC Gold." I said, "Yes, sir." Then he started in on his intensive questioning. He asked, "What's a nanoweber?" I replied, "I have no idea." A Weber is the unit of magnetic strength, important for getting signals on and off a magnetic tape. A nanoweber is 1/1000th of a Weber. The recorded level of tape is expressed in nanowebers per meter of tape. Who cares? Not me. "Flunk!" he exclaimed, with a big gotcha-like grin on his face. I could tell this job interview was going to be a barrel of laughs. After several more such questions, Miscavige finally told me that I failed the interview miserably. I should have just bailed at that point, as I knew becoming WC Gold would eventually lead me to post removal or even another RPF assignment. Instead, I kept my chin up, smiled, and said, "I still think I can do this post." I don't know what I was thinking. What was I thinking? He looked at me surprised. Then he appeared suspicious and claimed, "You only want this post to protect your husband." Boy, that came out of left field. I hadn't seen my husband in 4 years because he was on the RPF. I replied, "No, it's because I'm an experienced WDC member. I can apply the tools of management and I can enforce compliance to your orders in gold using CMO Gold." Miscavige ordered his deputy, Marty Rathman, to put me on the e-meter to find out if I had any other fish to fry as to why I'd volunteer for the post. I was clean. Marty Rathman. Yeah, we go into this room and he's like trying to find out, totally suspicious of why I would say that I could do it. Why would I want it? What's the benefit of me doing it? There was absolutely none. It was because it was a pain in the ass to sit for a week with people refusing the post, you know? I couldn't take it. And I'm not afraid. I wasn't afraid. I'd been up and down and busted that left, right, and center and on the post and out of the post and wearing commander stripes one day and a boiler suit the next day. And it was just like, you know what? Okay, I'll give it a shot. I'm as trained as anybody else that's going to be able to do this job, whatever, if it helps, uh, then I'll do it. Anyway, so what happened next? It says, "A dispatch was sent to WC chairman the following day to put me on post as WC Gold." There. He said he realized I was still holding several other sectors. Okay, so this is Miscavige now. Miscavige said he realized I was still holding several other sectors, but said that since he had to perform so many functions at the same time, so could I. So yeah, I was holding WDC Scientology, WDC Sea Org, WDC Celebrity Centers, and now I'm going to be WDC Gold on top of it. It's a full-time job in its own by itself. Anyway, how's anybody supposed to succeed like this? But anyway, whatever. So we started getting my other jobs replaced by people so I could be full-time WC Gold. The first major evolution I had to handle was a tape series release scheduled for New Year's 2001. This was pulled off successfully with affluent stats. Around the same time, my husband Jim returned home from the RPF, so things were starting to look up. We next embarked upon a task of reorganizing all gold departments, divisions, and post assignments. This became a huge nightmare with weeks and weeks of repeat submissions and rejects from Miscavige and many sleepless nights. We had so many meetings that lasted hours and hours going over the potential structures for the organization. As soon as I'd submit one version for approval, Miscavige changed his mind and threw the whole thing into question again. I began to think he didn't want this done. I did this work with Annie Tidman. You've heard about Annie Tidman. She was holding the commanding officer for CMO Gold at the time. So as WC Gold and COCMO Gold, we worked together to get the structure submitted and the posting submitted to David Miscavige. But anyway, he kept rejecting them no matter what we did. Not having a finalized organizational pattern for Gold left about 500 people in limbo. This situation went on for months. In one meeting, Miscavige told me out of the blue, "Did you know that Mark Yeager secretly wants you to fail as WC Gold?" Yeager was WC chairman then, sitting right next to me as he said this. "No, sir," I replied, not knowing where this was going. Miscavige told Yeager to tell me it was true, which he did. The meeting was then continued, as if Miscavige had just told me he liked sugar in his coffee or something that mundane. I sat there in disbelief. Yeah, it doesn't look like I mentioned it, but after this meeting, Shelley Miscavige came up to me and said, whispered in my ear, "Don't go PTS." And what that means in Scientology speak is don't become a potential trouble source, meaning your effect of suppressives. Because it was obviously very suppressive to me about what these guys were doing. Miscavige bringing up this stuff about Yeager and Yeager saying he wants me to fail and all this stuff. She didn't want me to go affect about it and, I don't know, cave in about it or something like that. I've heard worse, believe me. But anyway, I thought that was interesting that she thought that what Miscavige and Yeager were doing would affect me like that. Another meeting was held where Miscavige called in Mark Ingber, now posted as a janitor after his removal as WC chairman a few months earlier. He had Mark get involved with the Gold reorganization planning. My nightmare. Miscavige already knew what I thought about working with Ingber, who apparently had sexual fantasies about me. Even his wife Liz had told me, "My husband is obsessed with you." This guy's a creep, I can tell you that. I assured her there was nothing to worry about, as I couldn't have been less interested in Mark, plus I was very happily married to Jim. The next day, Miscavige called another meeting where he appointed Mark Ingber as WC Gold and made me Mark's deputy. I should have looked for the nearest exit, man. So I really, really should have. It gets worse. I couldn't help but think that this was some sort of sick game Miscavige was playing. Within a few weeks, Ingber was in trouble for not completing the submission on how to reorganize Gold to Miscavige's satisfaction. He was put in for confessionals where it came up that he was again involved in fantasizing about me sexually. That afternoon, Miscavige walked over to me with a huge smile, asking if I had heard about Ingber. I said, "No, sir." He said, "I should find out." Yeager then brought me the reports from Ingber's confessionals. Yeah, Miscavige was standing right there wanting to see my reaction as I was reading it, by the way. He's so gross. After reading these reports, I said I didn't want to work with Ingber any longer. He was clearly fixated and messed up on the subject and doing weird stuff to himself throughout the day because of it. Yeager said, "You don't have a choice." So I'm being forced to be in the same cubicle with this guy who's just really a freak, okay? And all he can think about is sexual acts with me. And he's obsessed. And it's horrible. And I'm having to read what he's thinking about. Why should I know this? And why would they say that I don't have a choice, that I have to be in the same space with this guy? And Miscavige thinks it's funny, and he makes me his direct junior. Anyway, because I said I didn't want to continue to work with Ingber, Miscavige had one of his staff members put me in for a confessional. I saw the dispatch from him, meaning Miscavige, which said, "I know Amy had sex with Ingber." And if Miscavige says something happened, his loyal staff were not going to let up until they had the goods. These people, again, little demons, coming to take me away into one of these little auditing rooms and not letting me out until I confessed to having sex with Mark Ingber, which I couldn't stand. But anyway, the interrogator asked in 100 different ways, not if, but how I had sex with Mark Ingber. She'd describe different ways and ask if that's how we had it, all the while ignoring my answer of no. When she got no joy on the Ingber questions, she started probing to find out if there's anything I ever did that was perverted. She had an earpiece in, and she was getting instructions about what to ask by whoever in RTC was looking in on this confessional from the other room. Yeah, we had one of these look in, listen in, talk in setups with this little room, and you would go in for your interrogations, and 2 rooms over was the room where you had a screen and you could see everything that was going on, a camera on the e-meter, a camera on the person being interrogated, and talk in line to the person doing the interrogation so you can tell them exactly what you wanted them to say. How would you like going in there? How would you like going into that kind of room? Yeah, that sounds like a church. All of the confessional booths are set up with look-in, listen-in, and talk-in systems with video cameras positioned to be able to see the e-meter and the person confessing simultaneously on a split-screen monitor. Several grueling hours later, I was finally let out of that confessional room. This episode left a very bad taste in my mouth for David Miscavige. It was nothing short of sexual harassment. And I also hoped I would run into Ingber, who was now off scrubbing dumpsters somewhere on the property, so I could let him know what I thought about all of his creepiness. I continued to hold WDC Gold for another month, believe it or not. Miscavige kept up with this game of disapproving anything submitted by him. I felt I was just wasting time. Nothing was being accomplished. Finally, Miscavige removed me from post for failure to get the reorganization of gold taken to a done. I was sent to estates and given a huge sewage pump to scrape. I was then told to scrub all of the estate's bathrooms and toilets with a toothbrush. Once that was completed, I was put out in a field to dig trenches. Yeah, they didn't even have a purpose. It was just to dig, to be digging. I spent weeks out there in the sun, digging and digging. Meantime, I was separated again from my husband, restricted to the base, staying in a trailer by the swamp, taking showers in the garage, and eating meals after everyone else was done. This gave me plenty of time to think about my future. I contemplated making a run for it, but couldn't figure out how, since I was under tight surveillance and there was razor wire on all fences that I wouldn't be able to climb over. There was also a huge security force at the INT base that would track me down and drag me back for even worse punishment, like I had seen done with so many others in the past. I also wasn't totally sure I wanted to forsake the goals I'd worked so hard to achieve and leave all of my friends behind. As I dug, I kept telling myself, this will all come to pass. You're tougher than this. You've made a commitment you need to honor. You have so many long-term friends here that you can't just abandon. They would label you a suppressive person so you wouldn't be able to see your mom again. You'll forfeit your spiritual freedom. You have no money, so you won't get very far. You have no bank account, 0 credit, only a 9th grade education, and no prior employment history. You don't even know how to drive or how to cook, so get real. You're not going anywhere. I continued to dig. Eventually, I was allowed to rejoin the group, and I was reposted in the programs branch of CMO INT. One day, Miscavige came in and said I was popular across the whole base. He had a big smirk on his face, so I knew he was being snide, and I wasn't interested in playing his little game. I said, "Okay, sir." His wife, Shelley, asked, "Aren't you going to ask him why?" I said, "No." Miscavige walked away at that point. I was then told by someone who heard the conversation that I had better get myself briefed because it's not good and I have something I need to handle. I called the internal executive and asked what this was all about. She told me that my earlier confessional reports had been sent to Miscavige. He saw that I had confessed to a time that I put a finger in my rear end during sex with my husband. Miscavige then coined the term finger up the butt to describe the type of transgressions the staff were confessing instead of coming clean on what we've done to actively sabotage Scientology expansion. I pointed out that the quote unquote confessional Miscavige put me in on only asked for perverted sexual activities, and I was told I wouldn't be let out of the room until I either confessed to having sex with Mark Ingber, which I didn't do, or admitted to some other form of sexual perversion. I couldn't believe that Miscavige made this incident a joke around the base. This was not only embarrassing, but a serious invasion of privacy and a violation of the priest-penitent relationship the church is meant to honor. Which they don't, by the way, which they do not. They absolutely do not. And don't tell a single person in Scientology one single thing unless you want it spread around. For real. They're so far from a church, it's just unbelievable. They're a destructive cult that will take anything and everything that you say and use it against you. I decided it was not safe to divulge anything personal in a confessional ever again, at least while I remained at the base. I decided that the next time I was given a confessional, I would say nothing or pretend my way through it. At this point, I had no more trust left in the leaders of my church or their quote unquote standard application of its technology, which is one hell of a departure for someone who had dedicated their entire life to help spearhead the expansion of Scientology across the globe to hopefully bring about a better world. Believe it or not, within a few days of this conversation, Miscavige ordered the internal exec of CMON to repost me in the Watchdog Committee. Here we go again. I was asked what sector I wanted to take over since Miscavige had busted most of the existing WDC members and the place was decimated. I replied saying that I was fully trained and responsible for the Celebrity Center sector for about 10 years all told, so that would be the logical choice. Miscavige walked in to CMON with my files in his hands. He plunked them on the table and said, "She doesn't know what the hell she's doing, but put her on post as WDC Scientology." Miscavige then told me that Kathy Rinder, the former post holder, did nothing effective to handle the New York church after 9/11 happened, and that's why she had been removed. I was instructed to get a series of evaluations and handlings done to build the New York church. He wanted it manned from the top down, and their public inflow lines opened up. He said Tom Cruise was going to be establishing a detoxification program for New York City firefighters. So the church was to become shipshape to service these people upon completion of their detox program. I lasted on this post for about a year. Physical assault dished out by Miscavige was picking up by this time. The whole working atmosphere became a fend for yourself, cover your own ass, trust no one, point the finger to anyone else, scream and yell and tell fellow staff members how much they suck type of environment. In one meeting on how to reorganize the upper management echelon of the church, Miscavige asked WDC why we proposed a specific organizational change. The woman who had the idea wasn't speaking up, being afraid of what would happen if he didn't like her reason. So I told him why. I should have let her get in trouble. Oh, no. Miscavige pretended to listen intently, and when I finished the explanation, he said, "I hate you. I hate you more than Kathy Rinder, and you know how much I hate her." After that, I kept waiting to be removed, but nothing happened. Though I received plenty of threats of offload removals and transfers to the outer corners of nowhere. The Watchdog Committee was in a meeting once when Miscavige walked into the room and started listening in on the matters we were discussing. He said it was all a bunch of blah, 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 and we needed to do something that was really important with our time. Mark Yeager, WTC chairman, was sitting at the head of the conference room table. His internal deputy named Astra was sitting next to him. Miscavige ordered Astra to go get a hair buzzer and bring it back to the meeting. We all sat there waiting and wondering where this was going. Astra arrived back a few minutes later with a buzzer and an extension cord to plug it in. Miscavige ordered her to go over to Mark Yeager and buzz his head. She did. This amused Miscavige to no end. Mark sat there and took the embarrassing abuse while Miscavige stood by, laughing like a hyena. Yeah, you're going to go around the table and start shaving everybody's head? I don't know what I would have done. I would have done something. But I should have done something for Mark at that time. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, there was one point around this time that my husband, Jim, stopped coming home. He was apparently restricted to the base and up for offload out of the Sea Organization for some reason. I wasn't even told about it. How I found out was by Miscavige himself. He came into WTC with a big fat grin on his face, asking the room, "Guess who I just ran into?" Everyone asked, "Who, sir?" And he said, "The offloadees. Willett, a close friend of mine for many years, and Jim Mortland," he announces. I stood there looking at him in shock, thinking, "Don't you realize who you're telling this to? In case you've forgotten, my name is Amy Mortland, the woman married to Jim Mortland for almost 2 decades, you slithering lizard." Shortly thereafter, I was pulled into the internal executive's office and shown a report on Jim to explain why he was being offloaded. It said that he had allowed a renovation project to go over budget and time expectancy. I was supposed to be shocked at how terrible he was for allowing this to occur and instantly see why I should be divorced from such an incompetent person. The internal executive asked for my decision as to whether or not I was going to stay with such a loser, where I'd get removed from post and put on the street with nothing, or if I'd do the right thing and honor my commitment to the Sea Org. I wasn't allowed to see Jim to go over this. My brainwashed response was, "I'm staying." I was so confused about where my life was going and under extreme stress. She said she arranged for me to go into a counseling session immediately to handle any needless upset I had regarding the loss of my husband. After I came out of session, spending at least an hour simply crying my eyes out, I walked back into my office where David Miscavige was conducting a meeting. I sat down at the conference table with the rest of WTC and several other executives in attendance. I tried to be somewhat discreet, but everyone's focus transferred to me as someone coming in late to a meeting with the chairman of the board is highly unusual. Miscavige took full advantage of this distraction to give me a hard time. He said, "You look like you've just had a cricket bat shoved up your ass," and proceeded to heckle me for several minutes, holding up the entire meeting of at least 25 others. Finally, I said, "It's hard times right now, sir." He responded, "No, it's not. You just need to get your ass into production." Things went downhill from there. WTC and the executive strata were routinely threatened with being disbanded. He'd tell us that there was no condition low enough to assign us. We were far below confusion, which is the lowest ethics condition in the church. The WC chairman was declared a suppressive person, along with several other top church executives, the steepest ethics gradient and most severe label by the church, though Miscavige left them on their posts with that degraded status. No one knew anymore who they could trust. Well, that is up and down the totem pole. Anyway, how do you like going on this journey with me, guys? Can you just picture being in these meetings with Miscavige and how he's gonna berate you, and you never knew if you would be, like, dumped in a dumpster one day or on an executive, post the next day doing some around the clock evaluation of some situation that had to be handled now. Oh my goodness. Well, let's take a look at what our next chapter is gonna be. It's gonna be chapter 10, Assault and Battery. Oh, wow. Well, assault and battery that I witnessed David Miscavige beating people, several instances. So I cover that in the next chapter. And, maybe one day authorities are going to take action because how is it that all of this abuse, this is just me. So many people went through their own nightmare hell. And so I don't know how long this can go on for unchecked, We've been making the information known, we keep making the information known, and, it's gotta come to a head one of these days. Um, but anyway, luckily, some justice is starting with the sentencing of Danny Masterson, and, the next civil case on this is gonna be very interesting to watch, um, as well as Leah's lawsuit against the fair game activities that they do on anyone who tends to speak out. So anyway, there's a lot more interesting things coming up the pike. So anyway, I hope you found this chapter to be informative and that you don't have a headache like I do right now. And we'll see you next time. Bye for now.